On November 15th of 1966, two young couples were driving near an abandoned munitions facility outside of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The site was known locally as the TNT area. It had been a part of West Virginia Ordnance Works during World War II. They later reported seeing a large gray figure standing near one of the concrete storage domes. They described it as roughly 6 to 7 feet tall, with wings that were large and folded behind its back, and with glowing red eyes. They said that the figure lifted into the air and followed their car. The local newspaper referred to it as a man-sized bird. Over the next 13 months, additional sightings were reported in and around Point Pleasant. On December 15th of 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed during rush hour. 46 people were killed. The official investigation determined that the cause was structural failure due to a fractured eye bar in the suspension chain. After the collapse, the sightings reportedly stopped. The figure became known as the Mothman. Hey everyone, this is Mike Porter. Welcome to Arcane Station. Tonight, obviously, we're talking about the Mothman, one of the most recognized cryptids or supernatural beings, whatever you want to say it is, in existence. Every year in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, there is a massive event. And people go there, and this is one of the largest cryptid events in existence. It's really surprising. You would think that the Bigfoot events would be a little bit more well attended, but apparently hundreds of thousands of people show up at this little town in West Virginia for the Mothman Festival. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this sort of investigation in 4 different parts. The first is going to obviously be the 1966-1967 sightings in Point Pleasant and the Silver Bridge collapse, which I've talked about already in the opening. The second is earlier historical and mythological examples of winged or avian beings associated with fear, death, or upheaval, and I'm going to present those in chronological order because this creature is very similar to many other creatures throughout history. The third is going to be modern sightings in the United States, including reports outside of West Virginia, and whether any large-scale disasters followed those sightings. We know that the Mothman prophecies and things like that, the book, talked about how this creature was sort of like a harbinger of doom, and the Silver Bridge collapse was the warning it was trying to give us, this harbinger of information to ensure that people knew that something was coming. We'll get into that. And then the fourth part is going to be my interpretation of what the Mothman represents and this reoccurring pattern of winged figures, how I interpret it, which I am no expert on any of this stuff. This is just sort of how my brain works. I look at things in a weird way, and so perhaps, hopefully, you'll come to the same conclusion at the end of it that I have. So descriptions across reports typically include large wings, humanoid or semi-humanoid shape, red or reflective eyes, night encounters, and appearances near infrastructures or wilderness edges or transitional spaces, and I'll talk more about that later. But here's the thing, there's no physical verified evidence. There's no confirmed biological samples. This case just entirely rests on eyewitness testimony, media documentation, and armchair researchers like myself looking at it and going, I think it's this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate documented events from the interpretation. The bridge collapse obviously had an engineering explanation, so I'm going to rule out any supernatural intervention on the part of the Mothman corroding an eye bolt. But the thing is that these sightings are reported experiences, and I'll say this every time. I believe people when they say that they've had an eyewitness experience because the way our reality works is that our reality is our own, and if you perceive something to be true, then it's true, whether or not other people agree with you, and they don't have to. I think a lot of this stuff is spiritual and religious and supernatural, and many people disagree with me, and that's fine. I think disagreement is a really good place to start having conversations. So the thing is that this archetype of a creature predates the 1966 arrival of Mothman. So I'm going to talk about how this pattern has happened throughout history and what we can take from that. So again, 1966 and 1967, I want to talk a bit about the area in which the first encounter took place. So the TNT area consists of more than 3,000 acres of formal federal land. During World War II, it had been used for the production and storage of explosives, and these concrete bunkers that are built basically are abandoned, and they look sort of like igloos. It's a really thick, dense concrete in a dome shape, and the reason for this is that it was to store these munitions, and if they exploded, these concrete forms actually were the most efficient for suppressing that explosion. So that's the reason why they were put in place, and that's the reason why they were shaped the way they are. What's interesting about it is, and you can watch people that go do investigations there, in the interior of those spaces have these crazy acoustics, which makes things really amplified and reverby and weird. So it's already a creepy place. It's abandoned. Number one, that's creepy. Number two, it has these weird acoustics inside that make you feel kind of weird. And number three, there's these reports of these creatures out there. So it's pretty intense in terms of how people react to the space. Now, their access roads are drivable in some of these areas, and local residents would sometimes go out there and, party. Kids will go out and party at places that seem like it's a little bit odd, and parents don't want them to go because first of all, they want to scare themselves, and then secondly, they want the isolation. But after the November 15th report that the couples had, additional sightings were documented within a few days. And then on November 16th, in 1966, a volunteer fireman, Newell Partridge, reported hearing a strange whining sound while watching television at his home near Salem, West Virginia. He later stated that the television screen went dark and that his dog ran into the nearby woods after reacting to something outside. Now, he reported seeing two red eyes resembling bicycle reflectors looking out from the woods, and he said the dog didn't return. Local law enforcement received multiple reports during the following weeks. So Deputy Sheriff Millard Halstead interviewed early witnesses and reportedly commented that the accounts were accurate. The animal did not resemble any known bird species native to the region. And I want to stop here for a second. One of the things that people are saying that people were seeing is a type of crane that is not native to West Virginia, but could have been migrating and lost, maybe damaged or something like that. And I think it's a sandhill crane, but they have, I'll look that up real quick. They have a very distinctive pattern. I just want to take a look at the picture of it. Yeah, so sandhill cranes are quite tall, but they're only about 7 to 11 pounds. But they have gray bodies and they have red eyes, but they also have red on their heads. Now, obviously, if you're looking at two bicycle reflector type eyes looking out from the woods, most likely not a sandhill crane, but many people that think that this is a misidentified animal think that the sandhill crane is the one that people are seeing, and that occasionally they do get off their normal migration patterns and could have been seen in that area. I just want to put that out there first. All right, so Several grave diggers working in a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia, also reported seeing a large winged figure lift up from nearby trees. Their account was published in regional newspapers shortly after the initial sighting, so descriptions across all the reports remain generally consistent in these key elements. The height is estimated between 6 and 7 feet tall, which obviously a sandhill crane is not. I think they get 4 to 5 feet tall. Their wingspan is described as wide enough to span the width of a roadway. Now, I believe that one single lane section of road, depending on which road you're looking at, is 16 feet. So 32 feet is quite large. If you're looking at a two-lane highway, if you're looking at a single-lane road, 16 feet. So even 16 feet is quite large. They're said to have red or glowing eyes. However, in the initial report, they said that the eyes reflected from their headlights. So there's not an interior glow, but perhaps a reflection from the interior of the eye that looked like it was red. But the guy that talked about the red bicycle reflectors from the woods did not have a flashlight, therefore it could be an internal glow or the lights from the house that were reflecting off of this creature. They say that the flight is completely silent or near silent. So most of the birds that are nearly silent when flying are owls. Now, owls can get quite large. I'm going to type something else in. So the largest owl is the Eurasian eagle owl, and it has a wingspan of 6.5 feet, and it stands up to 30 inches tall, so almost 3 feet tall. Nowhere near 6 to 7 feet tall. So let's roll out the owl. So the other thing that they noticed is that rather than a horizontal wing flapping takeoff, it was a vertical takeoff. It just shot straight up into the air. So that rules out many of the birds as well, because they have to have sort of a running start to get up into the air. So throughout late 1966, the year I was born, and into 1967, sightings were reported along rural roads outside of town near the TNT site. Some accounts claim the figure was seen perched on abandoned structures or hovering near treetops. So national media coverage expanded after the story was picked up by wire services, and the name Mothman appeared in print shortly after the initial reports came and created this sort of label for the character. During this same time period, residents reported other unusual events. They had lights in the sky and UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomena. These accounts were later documented by the author John Keel during his investigation of the region, and the Mothman Prophecy book is a result of his work. By mid-1967, reports had decreased in frequency but had not stopped entirely. The final widely recognized sightings occurred shortly before the December bridge collapse. So sightings up until the collapse of the bridge. On December 15th of 1967, during the evening rush hour, so the busiest time on the road, the Silver Bridge failed. Vehicles fell into the Ohio River, and rescue operations continued through the freezing conditions. December is bitterly cold in West Virginia and Ohio, or can be. And, obviously going into the water is going to be a shock to the system, including all of the vehicles collapsing on top of one another. So as a result of this, 46 fatalities happened because of that bridge collapse. So after the bridge disaster, reports of the winged figure diminished significantly in the Point Pleasant area. So was this a result of this thing just taking off and leaving after a disaster, or was this because people were actually focused on the disaster and not looking to the skies anymore? That's up for debate, obviously. Now, obviously, there's no physical remains, no captures, and no verified photographic evidence, right? So we don't have any of that, which is a difficult thing to resolve. How do you believe something that you haven't seen yourself? And many people don't. And eventually, I'm going to do an episode about AI and how it's completely ruined any chance of photographic evidence being enough for belief anymore. All right, so this case rests entirely on eyewitness accounts and newspaper documentation. But also, there were some law enforcement interviews, and some of them had reported seeing this creature as well. Where most of the documentation takes place and where a lot of the lore comes from was that John Keel investigation and subsequent book. So that's the entire core Mothman account and where the mythos of Mothman comes from. But I'd like to say that there is very similar figures throughout the entirety of history of mankind that are very similar. So let's go back all the way to 2000 BCE in Mesopotamia. They had a creature, it's called Anzu, and this is referenced in Sumerian and Akkadian mythology. And it's described as a massive lion-headed eagle associated with divine power and disruption. In myth, Anzu steals the tablet of destinies, upsetting cosmic order. The figure represents upheaval and the disturbance of established structure. I would say there's nothing more established and structural than a bridge. So the disruption of that bridge by the Mothman, or seemingly associated with the Mothman, makes sense. So it's not a humanoid in the modern cryptid sense, but it establishes an early precedent for winged sky beings associated with disorder. So Mesopotamia is actually modern Iraq, and that's when this creature was talked about. Now, in the first century CE in Rome, ancient Rome, there was this concept of a thing called a Strix. Now, the Strix was referenced by a writer in a book called the Fasti in 8th century CE, and it was described as a nocturnal bird demon associated with death and misfortune, and it was often linked to piercing or unnatural eyes and predation at night. The term later influenced medieval European folklore, evolving into various night-flying entities. So the Strix, sort of like a precursor almost to a vampire, but very similar in many respects to the Mothman in terms of its appearance. I'm going to mispronounce this next word. So in Slavic regions, there's the Stryga, Stryga. Now this creature appeared in Eastern European folklore, particularly around Poland and the surrounding regions. And it's described as being associated with death, nocturnal activity, and in some traditions, capable of flight. And it's sometimes portrayed with glowing eyes or an unnatural appearance, and it's often conflated with early vampire lore. So Strix, Strigoi, and Stryga. You would think it would be pronounced differently, but if you go to the pronunciation thing, it barely makes a word. So take go look at it yourself and see what I'm talking about. It's hard to pronounce. All right, so then we go to pre-colonial North America. So indigenous peoples and many of these tribes around the plains and Pacific Northwest cultures have this creature called the thunderbird. Now, obviously, the thunderbird is not moth-like, but it's described as a massive winged spirit associated with storms, thunder, and transformation. And again, it's not humanoid, but it represents a sky entity connected to environmental upheaval and power. Now, there's some key modern sightings of the... Now, obviously, there's mythos and oral traditions around the thunderbird in the indigenous populations. However, there are actually historical and modern sightings of the thunderbird. The first of which I can talk about is 1890 in Tombstone, Arizona. 2 cowboys reportedly shot and killed a massive alligator-like bird with a 190-foot wingspan, and the story was published in the Tombstone Epitaph. I don't know how a 190-foot wingspan would work, but there you go. And you have to remember, too, in the 1890s, there was a lot of exploitive journalism to sell papers, so that could be a result of that, but it's obviously a sighting that has been reported on, so I wanted to talk about it. In 1977 in Lawndale, Illinois, multiple witnesses reported 2 giant birds, with one allegedly lifting a 10-year-old marlin low a short distance. So it swooped down, grabbed the kid, flew a short distance, let him go, and then took off. In 2018, in Alaska, a pilot reported a creature with a wingspan comparing to a small aircraft near Prince of Wales Island. And the small aircraft he's talking about was, I believe, a Piper, and I think it had a 14-foot wingspan, if I'm not mistaken. And then in 2019 through 2024, in the Midwest, reports from Illinois and Iowa describe massive birds of prey, sometimes with 16-foot wingspans and often appearing black overhead. So the common characteristics of all of these things is a 15 to 20-foot wingspan, 4 to 8 feet tall, sometimes leathery rather than feathered wings. And they're known for extreme, sometimes predatory behavior and often sighted near remote areas. So the thing that comes to mind for me when they're talking about leathery skin is a pterosaur or some sort of prehistoric relic. But some other possibilities could be a misidentified California condor or an Andean condor, which can have a wingspan of up to 10 feet. Why that would be up in Iowa and Illinois, I have no idea. But that's the corollary. The thing that could be most closely related to it is an Andean condor. I think it could be maybe some sort of surviving pterosaur or massive prehistoric raptor, like the Argentus magnificens. So this is rather than being a leathery dinosaur, it's more bird-like, but still prehistoric. Many historical reports, including the 1890 incident, are considered tall tales or hoaxes, although sightings continue to be reported. So there's no physical bodies, obviously, or conclusive high-quality photographs, but I think it was in the Smithsonian, there's a man standing next to the outline of the Argentus magnificens, and the size of that thing is enormous, and you could probably find that black silhouette of bird with man standing next to it if you go into Google, and you'll find that there is actually a museum exhibit that has that image that shows this massive size of this bird that could possibly be from the past. And maybe there are some holdover relics, although something that large, it would be very difficult to hide. All right, so in the 7th and the 8th century CE onward, there's this concept of a Tengu in Japan. So it's basically like an avian or beaked entity with wings. And later on, the representation of it shifts more towards a humanoid form, and it has a red face with a long nose. So you've probably seen those masks of Tengus, which are bird-like. And there's even some concept of basically being a humanoid-like raven. But it's often described as appearing to travelers, and it's associated with spiritual imbalance or disruption. So again, this is in Japan. And then we have something else which is kind of takes me back to that leathery skin thing. We have gargoyles. And stone gargoyles are installed in European cathedrals all over, but they're often winged, sometimes humanoid, and frequently depicted with exaggerated eyes and animalistic features. Although they're architectural in origin, Folklore has been developed around the belief that the gargoyles represented protective or watchful boundary figures placed on sacred structures to ward off evil. So that's the origin of the gargoyles. It's not an actual creature, but it's a representation of that creature. However, I'll go into some detail about that in a minute. Now we have this idea of a Spring-Hill Jack character, and that's in 1837 to 1904. And basically, he's described as a humanoid figure with glowing red eyes, and he would bounce around great heights, like 12 to 14 feet up in the air to jump on rooftops when he was being pursued by a armed mob. So he was sighted in an area of rapid industrial and urban transformation in Victorian England. So he was like this creature that was disrupting the order at the edges of nature as well. And then we had the Flatwoods Monster, and although that's a completely different sort of creature, it's very similar in that there was a light in the sky, so there was a UAP that took place, and it is in Braxton County, West Virginia, so it's described as a tall creature with glowing eyes and a non-human appearance. While it's not winged, but it is associated with that sky anomaly, so that's why it's sort of a corollary. In 1976, we had an Owlman in Cornwall, England, and it was reported near Mothman Church in Cornwall, and it was described as a tall winged humanoid with owl-like features. And witnesses reported glowing or large eyes and hovering or perching behavior on church towers. These sightings were extremely limited, and all of the reports were anecdotal, so somebody told somebody about it. But I'm going to give you some key sightings and timelines. So, 1926, this is documented, 2 young boys reportedly saw a large birdman creature near the churchyard. In April of 1976, which is termed the crazy summer, 2 teenage girls saw a large winged man-sized figure hovering over a church tower, and they provide sketches of a birdman monster. In July and August of 1976, several more sightings occurred, often accompanied by reports of other strange phenomena in the area. In 1978 and 1989, continued reports of a 5-foot-tall gray creature with large feet, and in one instance, clawed wings. In 1995, a tourist from Chicago reported seeing a man-bird in the same area, so he went to Cornwall and saw this creature. So, experts often suggest that these sightings were of a large escaped eagle owl, which can have a 6-foot wingspan. Now, I don't know if that was actually reported that there was an escaped eagle owl, but they're saying that this could be a misrepresentation or a hoax. They just misidentified a large owl or a heron in a wooded area. So due to the location near potential ley lines, some consider the creature a paranormal entity or high strangeness phenomenon connected to local UFO reports. So while the Owlman of Cornwall is the original, similar reports of winged humanoids sometimes appear around cryptid folklore, so this is what we're talking about now. And I talked about gargoyles before, and there are actually reports of gargoyles in the United States. So in the 80s and 90s, in Chicago and other Midwestern cities described large winged humanoids perching on buildings, bridges, or industrial structures. These were often referred to as gargoyle sightings, and they had large wings, red or reflective eyes, perching on infrastructure, and again, primarily in Chicago. However, in Ohio, between 2014 and 2016, witnesses reported a small winged bipedal creature, often near cemeteries, that appeared to run on rooftops and chase people before flying away. In 2021, a 5-foot-tall black-winged creature described as not a bird was observed flying near trees in Bryan, Texas. In Pennsylvania in 1993, it was known as the Butler Gargoyle, and this was a 7 to 8 foot tall creature and was reported by witnesses who were drawing a comparison to the Mothman. And then At Johnson Space Center in 1989, they had a security officer reported a black-winged creature chasing him to his car, with subsequent claims of investigation by officials. And in Puerto Rico of 2018, they reported the Munguayas neighborhood involved dead birds with punctures, and the residents described a potential gargoyle. So wings, humanoid, often with bat-like wings, known to be active at night, sometimes observed perched or flying near buildings, and it's associated with mysterious animal deaths. So there's also some other Chicago winged humanoid reports, very similar, but again, all of these reports is clearly not an animal, is clearly not a human, is clearly not mechanical, and they're unclear if it's a supernatural element. And their physical descriptions are fairly consistent: wings, elevated posture, red eyes, nocturnal appearance, silent or minimal sound, and sudden disappearance. So I think what's interesting about this is that I feel like these are creatures that are boundary dwellers. They are supernatural or paranormal. So I don't think that Mothman is a biological animal, and there's no evidence to support that the Mothman is a harbinger of doom. The Mothman is the only creature associated with an infrastructure collapse. The Mothman is the exception, not the rule. So all of these other winged giant creatures that are supernatural in appearance or extra normal, I will say, paranormal, there's no other infrastructure, large loss of life, or collapses of anything that have taken place. So that Mothman is the exception. So there's also no physical evidence supporting an undiscovered species. There's no remains, no photographs, and there's no ecological trace that would support a breeding population. So I don't view this, I don't view it as a disaster omen. Like I said, the Silver Bridge collapse appears to be the exception rather than the rule. Other winged humanoid sightings, the Owlman, the gargoyle, the thunderbird encounters, none of those have been followed by a catastrophic event. But what's consistent between all of these sightings is that they're always sighted around these boundary areas: bridges, shorelines, industrial ruins, forest edges, airports, and church towers. These are transitional spaces. They're edges between defined environments. Human development frequently presses against these edges. People build bridges across rivers. Airports are on reclaimed land. Factories sometimes are in wooded areas. Highways run through rural terrain. So my position is that the Mothman fits a threshold of creature pattern. Basically what I'm saying is it's not a monster, it's not a predator, and it's not necessarily hostile, but it's disruptive because it causes people to react in a disrupted way. It appears in places where boundaries are under strain. It represents a reaction to intrusion, industrial decay, infrastructure stress, ecological disturbances. Across cultures, boundary spirits are common. They guard forests, mountains, rivers, and sacred sites. And they're often depicted as part human, part animal, and they're either winged or elevated in some way. And the Mothman form fits that structure. So, I don't claim to know exactly what it is, but I think that this is a spiritual being that is protecting an environment. And the further that we press our industrialized world into these sacred natural spaces, the more pushback we're going to get. So I always tell people this when we're talking: I would prefer to have 1,000 acres of land somewhere with no neighbors. And that's not because I dislike people, it's because I love the concept of being at one with nature, living with nature. raising chickens. We have chickens. But going beyond that, like actually working with my hands in the land, I feel like the closer that we get to nature, the closer we are to like a balance in our lives, a peace in our lives. And so perhaps these creatures are just a warning against becoming too industrialized and pushing too far into those natural spaces. All right, that's all I have for tonight. If you've enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate you telling a friend, liking and subscribing. I'm doing YouTube shorts right now. I'm calling it a Arcane Station Paranormal Cryptid High Strangeness Horror Minute, where I talk about a very quick topic just to ensure that people have that time to listen to that episode. And if it sparks anything in you and you want to hear more about, just please let me know. Send me an email at mike@arcanestation.com, mike@arcane- put a little dash in there like a minus sign, station.com. Also, I have a Patreon. I'm writing a book that's going to be up on Patreon under my paid section. And I have stuff for sale, which I'll be talking about probably on my YouTube channel. So Arcane Station Podcast, go to YouTube. You can find it there. I have an Instagram account, Arcane Station 2. Apparently there's a musician that has an album called Arcane Station, and he's already taken that. Dang it. And so, yeah, anywhere you can find me on socials, I'd be happy to talk to you. Have a wonderful night.